Hi, everybody, and welcome to another lesson in Tanya. We're starting this week, chapter 31st. Just a bit of introduction. We're moving ahead, we're forging ahead.
Wasn't it just also Rebbe's birthday?
Not birthday,
Oh.
day of passing.
Oh.
The 24th of Tevet, which was last Friday. Today is the 27th, 3 days ago.
Incorrect all around.
How do I know? Because I share the same birthday as the Alter Rebbe. I was born on his birthday, so you can't mess me up on that. So, a short introduction with some stories. This chapter is one of the foundations of the Hasidic teachings. Last chapter, chapter 30th, the concentration was on the idea that a person must humble themselves in front of every human being, no matter what type of status, what kind of a human being the person is. When I meet that person and I pass by that person, I speak to that person, I should always look up to that person, thinking that this guy is much greater than me. And the rabbi went on to explain that for many reasons, number one, if I was given the same sets of tests or challenges, I might have been way farther than that person. Number two, in essence, the Rebbe says, you take the lowest of the low, a person who disobeys God on every level, and then you judge that person, but you do not realize that you yourself are acting the same way. Says the Rebbe, when was the last time you concentrated and served God in prayer properly, thinking every word you say, you speak before a king? Thinking about when you do a mitzvah, kiddush on Friday night, grace after meal, concentrating on what you're saying in front of whom. We don't do it. You know why? Because we allow the evil soul, the animal soul, to take over, to rule. Well, it's not much of a difference. That person who is addicted or misbehaving is also allowing the evil soul to control, just that the quantity might be different. He's a sin. For me, it's not concentrating on positive commandments, but we are in the same category. And towards the end, the Rebbe had another idea that that in essence, if I concentrate on what I behave, the way my behavior, I actually also disobey God. And the Rabbi used the example of gossip or slander, malicious slandering. It's very hard for us to refrain. Why? Because the evil is controlling and is giving us the great pleasure of speaking out what I know, what I heard, etc. So the other person does it by stealing money, and I do it by speaking inappropriately. So it's not that I'm not much less. The fact that I'm dressed with white shirt does not make me a better person. The fact that I look like a holy man does not make me holier than anybody else. This was the idea after the rabbi in 28 was speaking about breaking apart the human. To break ourselves apart, the rabbi used the example that the Zohar says that if you have a big piece of wood, a block of wood that you want to have fire consume it, you have to chop it off to small pieces. Once you have small pieces, you're able to, the fire will catch on to it. The same is a body. The human body, if we are disobeyed, if we are not connected with God, is because the fire of the soul is not able to get there because the ego is very big, so you have to crush the ego. When you crush the ego, you are able to allow godliness, the soul, the fire of the soul to enter. This chapter, so as I said, these are found fundamentals in the Hasidic world, particularly in Chabad. And the words from last chapter is me'od me'od evei shval ruach, very, very much. Be very humble before every human being. It doesn't, yes, Heidi.
Is it also that if somebody has the same opportunities as me, they could be even better?
Of course.
Yeah.
By the way, Moses, the greatest leader, the reason God chose Moshe is because of his humility. Why was he so humble? The Medrash tells us he always thought to himself that if someone else would have had the same talents and the same set of parents that he had, he would have done a lot better job. So therefore, when he spoke to people, he had such great humility that no other human being can compare to his humility, despite the fact that he did not ignore the reality that no one come close to God like he did. No one deliver God's message. No one ever disobey God like he. But yet he was very humble before every human being. The Rabbi Gams, this chapter is to speak about the idea of sadness, melancholy, depression. Unfortunately, it is a malady in this day and age. I think I shared with you on many occasions that the over-the-counter medication for depression have risen exponentially above any other category. The same is about prescribed medication. The amount of medication, the amount of the medication people take for depression is something that have never happened before in the universe, in history. Even though it makes no sense, because we are in a generation where we have everything we want. We have from the outside, it looks like the greatest life in history. Everyone else, if you ask them which generation they want to live, I'm sure they will say in our generation, because we have so much. Yet, people have never been as depressed as we are. So the rabbi is going to address, if you are breaking your body, you are screaming and cursing yourself. If you remember in chapter 29, using all kinds of curse words against the body, you are very, very low life human being. And you humble yourself before every human being, thinking that they are greater than you are. How are we to deal with depression? It will bring a person into becoming depressed. And that's the topic of chapter 31. How do we utilize sadness and make sure it does not lead to depression? Because sadness on its own is part and parcel of life. If someone can say that he will not be sad, he can eradicate sadness. So there are two problems with that. A, it's impossible, because if you have joy, you have sadness. Sadness is the other side of joy. It's like two sides to the same coin. It's impossible to eradicate sadness. It's there. Number two, there are times where we have to be sad. The 9th of Av, we have to be depressed and sad for the destruction of the temple. When someone loses someone very close to, that is very close to, they are very sad. If someone is to fight his body and not be sad, they're going to hurt themselves. On the other hand, if sadness is not good, because serve God with joy, how is it possible that sadness is part of our life? How is it possible that the Torah tells us there are times when we must practice sadness? If it's not good, we shouldn't do it. Like non-kosher food is not kosher, so you don't have it the whole year. There is no times where you have it. And by sadness, what we see is that there are times when sadness is encouraged. And therefore, the rabbi is asking, how do we deal with sadness and make sure it does not overtake us and get us into getting depressed? That's number one. I should also say that some people have suffered or experienced tragedies or sadness in a ways that they really need medical attention and they need professional help. And that's not what we are discussing here. Because when someone is in a state of sadness, beyond just being able to talk themselves out of it, they should seek medical experts, they should seek medical help, and they should treat themselves with medication. I just came back from Israel last night. And I traveled to Israel to participate at the wedding of my sister's son. My sister married off a son. The same sister who was about 6 months ago, lost a son that was older than this boy. And the devastation that has taken over to my sister and her husband is immeasurable. Losing a child, it's catastrophe, to a point that they did not even care about the wedding. So I'm glad I was there. I added to their joy, and I'm very close with them. So we had a heart-to-heart discussion. I wish I was allowed to share it because it's very relevant to this, but I'm not because of privacy. But what I can say is that my brother-in-law, whose father survived the Holocaust, his father watched as they took off the train his mother and sister, and they shot them in front of him, in front of his eyes. And my brother-in-law, we sat down and he says to me, I am losing it. I'm losing it. I don't have a day. They don't care about leaving town. They don't care about traveling. They don't care about conversations. Life is really, it's all their energy is gone. And he says, my father told me on many occasions that he watched as his mother and sister are being shot off the train. He watched them from close proximity. I don't understand how was my father able to cope with it and continue on surviving, running away, living in Russia, escaping Russia from Russia, coming to Israel, then moving to the United States, being able to raise a family with 5 or 6 kids. And he was a healthy human being who was able to. He says, I lost a son, one, not a mother and a sister, and he lost other people, other members, except he didn't see that happen. And yet I'm unable to cope. So my answer to him is obviously that a child is different than a mother and a sister, almost, although it's impossible to start to measure them. But in addition, I think we live in a generation where we are much more fragile. And events in life, tragedies in our life affects us in ways that never did before. So in 2 generations ago, 50 years ago, 60 years ago, people were able to cope with much greater challenges. Today, we literally fall apart. I'm not speaking on anyone here. I'm sure everybody here is very strong, but I'm just sharing with you the reality and experience that just as a person shared with me in this last weekend on Friday night. So we need to understand that in today's world, we should not play down depression or melancholy. If someone is down, they should seek medical attention. They should not say, I'll overcome it because so-and-so did, or my parents were able to overcome such experiences. But rather, we should take it seriously and realize that healthy life is the goal of our existence, and whatever needs to be done should be taken care of. Having said that, I am going to just very briefly repeat again. Sadness is part and parcel of our life. It's the other side of joy. In addition, the Torah mandates for sadness at some days and at some occasions. So there is such thing as sadness. How is it possible for a person to cope with sadness and get out and move on with life? And the rabbi is going to talk about 2 points. The rabbi, I'm giving you a summary before so we can go through the reading a little fast. The rabbi is going to say the following. Do you remember the beginning of Tanya, we studied that there are 2 levels of shells. There is the 3 unclean shells, and there is the nuga. Anybody remember nuga shell? What is nuga? I told you nuga is not good nor bad. The shell, the peel of forbidden, the 3 shells, are compared to a walnut shell, so that there is no benefit for consumption. You can't eat it. You have to get rid of it. It's there to protect, like a pecan. It has to protect the fruit from insects, etc. But once you want to benefit from the fruit, you have to remove the shell. If you eat it, it's not healthy and may be dangerous. Nuga, I always compare it to an orange peel. The orange peel, you're not going to eat it, you don't like it. But if you you dry it, or you add some sugar to it, it becomes a delicacy. You can enjoy it. In other words, there are some benefits if you make some changes to it. This is what sadness is about. If anybody has any questions, please ask so I can move on, assuming that you remember the difference between these 2 categories of shells. You don't remember? Huh?
We're just saying hi.
Oh,
Sorry.
so sorry.
They say hi with signal.
Women can do it, sir.
Yeah. So, says the Rebbe, there is one category of activities or goods that are completely forbidden, and therefore we must disengage, like slander, lying, cheating, non-kosher food. These are prohibitions, and there is no exceptions. There is no such thing as I can have a leeway at certain times or at certain stages in my life. But then you have another shell, which is nuga. Nuga means it's something that's not good, you do not serve God with. However, realize it's not forbidden. So at times you're allowed to touch it. The Rebbe will explain also why. But right now, says the Rebbe, even though sadness is totally not holy, it's not part of serving God, there are times we must use that shell to fight the evil inclination. And therefore, sadness at times, temporarily, is acceptable. That's the first explanation. And I'll get a little deeper into this idea. But the second idea the Rabbi is going to talk about is there is a major distinction between sadness and bitterness. Bitterness is something that hurts. Why am I not as good as the other person? Why am I unable to reach the goals I'm setting? Why am I not able to concentrate in prayer, etc.? Therefore, I have to try harder. Therefore, I have to dedicate myself. In other words, it motivates a person to do a little better. That type of sadness that leads to action is actually energizes the person, and it's a great positivity. What the Torah tells us that God hates and God will not be around is sadness for the purpose of melancholy, as we call it, to despair, to give up, because anyway, I'll never be good, I'll never be able to overcome my urges. That's something the Torah forbids. Going back, the Rabbi is this chapter is going to be divided into four sections. The first one is sadness. Why is it wrong? What's so bad about it? Number two, the Rabbi is going to tell us there is a difference between plain sadness versus bitterness. Bitterness is a oomph. It gives you energy to move ahead and forge higher, while sadness pulls you down, and that's not acceptable and against God. Number three, how do I turn sadness into bitterness? In other words, take something that's very negative and use it to motivate you to be better, to be bitter about your condition and your behavior, and make yourself a better person. And finally, the difference between despair and hope. Despair is sadness, hope is bitterness. And says the Rabbi is going to explain to us that we need to understand that bitterness will give me hope. Sadness will make me despair, and therefore it's not acceptable. I just want to share with you let's start with a story. There was a famous Rabbi Shlomo of Karlin. Karlin, he was the grandson of the Baal Shem Tov. His mother is the daughter of the Baal Shem Tov. One time he came to visit the Alter Rebbe, the author of the Tanya, and he spent Tisha B'Av. The 9th of Av is the saddest day of the year. We all mourn. We don't sit on comfortable chairs. We don't eat, don't drink. We don't socialize. And he saw in the synagogue, there was a chassid, Reb Shmuel Munkes. I think I shared with you. He was the clown of the yard. He used to make fun of everybody. He used to poke fun. So he had little... in Hebrew, in Yiddish, we call it beralach. It's a circle, like small apples, green circle, like marbles, they're the size of marbles. And they're very small, they're not for consumption. They grow on trees. They're small, circular type of shape of a ball that's green. What do you call it? Crab apples? Are they, you can eat them?
Sour, very sour.
Okay. What size are they? Half an inch okay. So he filled up his pockets and he would throw at people, hitting them in their faces, in their eyes, and turn around. And it causes all the children to get excited because when someone gets hurt, ouch, and everybody was laughing, and they chase him and he runs around. In short, he made everybody enjoy and become a Simchat Torah over there. It became a joyous occasion. So Rebbe Aaron of Karlin turned to the Alter Rebbe and he says, "You see this Jew? Because of him, the Holy Temple is destroyed. Because he takes a sad day and makes him happy." Well, the Alter Rebbe did not say anything, but the next morning he told the Rebbe Aaron let's take a walk. While they're talking a Torah study, they took a walk. As they go in deep into the forest, they see a man who is screaming to God out of great tears, crying, and he lied down next to fire ants mound, allowing the fire ants to climb on him, biting him, and he was screaming to God that this is the pain he is suffering, and every Jew is suffering, and it's time for God to come and save the Jewish people. Rebbe Aaron of Karlin saw this man. He turned to the Alter Rebbe and he says, "This chassid of yours, because of him, God is going to bring back the temple." So the Alter Rebbe said to him, "By the way, this man is the same one from last night." And that's the truth. So what's going on? This is one explanation. Now, this story I heard when I was a very young child. The point is, for this, in our context, there is a difference between sadness and bitterness. What the Chassid saw is that people were not bitter, but plain sad. And that drives God away. And therefore, he needed to bring some joy to get rid of that sadness. But in the morning, when he was between himself and God, he was very, very bitter, but he was serving God by bringing bitterness. We see also that God will not rest among any place or any person unless they are happy. Where do we see that? Jacob is one example I want to use. There are many others. Thank you. One is that all the prophets, when they wanted to hear God's word, what did they do? They used to use an instrument to make themselves feel happy. Anybody heard that? It's in the prophet. It says in Hebrew, when they felt they want God's spirit to rest, they would use the violin or they use instruments to elevate their spirit into happiness. No prophet will ever be able to connect to God unless they are happy. That's number one. Number two, as Sydney correctly mentioned, why do I say Sydney? I'm so sorry. I'm embarrassed. Linda, why do we say, where do we see by Jacob? There is a story, another story, it's in the text. Jacob mourned the loss of his son Joseph. Thank you so much.
There's no alcohol in here.
I'm going to tip you.
Sorry about that.
Soon I'm going to tip you. Jacob had been told that his son Joseph, the beloved son, has died. And he's mourning and refuses to get up. And we read that God for how long? For 22 years, he does not stop mourning. During those 22 years, God have never come to speak to Jacob. As soon as he is told that Yosef is alive, and he says, Rav od Yosef bni Chai, great, Yosef is alive, and he got up The Torah says, Vatchi Chai means life, Ruach, the spirit of Yaakov. His spirit was lifted. Rashi says, God appears to him. Because all the years that he experienced sadness, God was not around him. As soon as he got up of morning and he is becoming a happy person, God arrives. Therefore, if we want to have a connection to God, there is no room for sadness, no matter what's the reason. It may be very good excuses, but realize you are staying away from God. Simple as that.
Throughout Jewish history, we find PM. Anytime that God wants to talk to someone, you have to be happy to receive it.
Right. When you walk to the kitchen, I share that.
But even Jeremiah,
So
well, like Jeremiah was pretty sad, wasn't he? Jeremiah.
That's why he had to fall down on his face before he would. God wanted Jeremiah to deliver prophecy. Jeremiah's prophecy is called Nevi Azam. All the prophet, Jeremiah is the only prophet that all his prophecies is about curses and sadness to the Jewish people, as opposed to other prophets, right? So he did not want to. If you read at the beginning of the book of Jeremiah, he refuses. Says to God, there's somebody else, I don't want to, etc. When God says to him, you are the one, and there is no more questions. So when God wants to appear to him, they called him a Meshugina. Did you know that? It's in the prophet. They call him a Meshuga. Meshuga in Hebrew is Meshugina. He's a crazy person. Why? He would walk around in the marketplace in Jerusalem in a corridor. And then he would fall down and take off his clothes and start acting like a crazy person. And the reason is because God wants to appear to him. His body couldn't contain it because of his sadness. Therefore, he had to lose his functions. He wasn't acting. They called him a Meshugana. When someone described to the king, I think that Jeremiah is coming to deliver prophecy, the king says, why are you bringing this Meshugana? It's in the text in the book of Torah. So that's quite, because he had to have prophecy, he lost his entire control of his body, because God will not rest when someone is not happy. Here are two stories. Actually, I have another. There was the following are true stories. There was a man. There was a very wealthy man in a small village who, because he's the one who donated and paid all the communal needs, he was in charge, so to say, unofficially. And they were looking for a rabbi. And every time they would bring a potential rabbi, the rabbi would come for the weekend and speak and socialize. But then they would let the rich man have a conversation with the man. And at the end, usually the rich man would say, this is not a good one. So they would bring another, they would look, and they ran out of the rabbi. Every rabbi they brought in wasn't good enough. Even the community that liked a certain person, after a short conversation with this rich man, he would disqualify him. Until they brought in a Chabad rabbi. This is a true story. Unfortunately, it wasn't their first choice, but they ran out of choices, so they had to go to the Chabad. So they brought in a Chabad rabbi. Now, those of us who speak Hebrew, it would be easier for you to understand the gist of the story. So they liked him. Now they need to, the final hurdle is that rich man. So they bring him, and the rich man says, every time a potential rabbi who wants to serve our community, I want him to be able to answer me a question in the Bible. And so far, nobody was able to answer me. So here it is, your chance. He says to him, and it's actually 2 weeks ago in the Torah portion, he says that the Torah tells us about a new king that arose in Egypt.
Get up.
And that king decided to forget about the history and to enslave the Jewish people, right? It says over there that they made vayimareru et chayehem. They had embittered the lives of the Hebrews, of the children of Israel. So far, so good. You understand that? The words and embittered their life. Vayimareru et chayehem. By the way, we say it in the Haggadah. The traps are the tunes. The tune that you sing when you chanted, when you study and in Torah reading or anytime you read it. The tune over there is kadma ve'azla, meaning going up higher. It's two shapes. One word is like that, the other is like that. It's two traps that always come one with the other, and they signify great joy, great happiness. So I don't understand. The words of Vayimareru et chayehem, the words are they embittered and destroyed their life. How come the traps are signs of happiness? Did you understand the question?
Mhm.
And the Chassid said to him what Tanya is talking about. He says there is one type of sadness for depression, and that's not acceptable. But the Jewish people, it doesn't say that they made their life sad. It said that they made their life bitter. And bitterness, the Alter Rebbe, my master, he said to him, says that it's actually a jumping board to be motivated to do much more. And as the Torah immediately goes on, the more they enslaved them, the greater they became, right? God blessed them to have six children, and they kept expanding exponentially. Why? Because they were enslaved. So this rich man was wowed. And he says, you got my vote. And this man became the rabbi of that community. That's the idea of Vayimareru, and they embittered their life. Bitterness, because of life's challenges or because of what we studied until now, that we need to humble ourselves, is something that will motivate us to do a little better, to try harder, to reach higher. Here are some other stories. And that has to do with the text later, and I'll remind you about the stories. The first one is that there was a group of soldiers in a camp during the Russian Tsar. He had a camp of soldiers, and they were told one day that the Tsar is coming to visit. When the Tsar comes, you have to wear your nice outfits and stand tall and properly. But they were told that the Tsar will show up at 10 o'clock in the morning. One of the soldiers, it was a hot day, decided it's too hot, it's early, so he's jumping to the river to cool himself down. So he let off his clothes. There was no bathing suits then, or that place, and he's in the river. The problem was the Tsar shows up early. So in a quick decision, he decided to walk into the line and stand without his uniform. So he's standing there, and the Tsar goes by on his horse, and he sees the soldier. So the Tsar turned to him and he says, what's going on? So he says, Your Royal Majesty, is it the clothing that serve you or my body? It's my body. So my body is here. And the Tsar liked the answer. He was pleased and continued. There is more extensions to the story, but the point is, the Rebbe shared with a Chassid about this story, is that we need to realize that sadness is affecting the garments. But my body, is what serves God, is a godly soul. It should not and cannot be affected. That's what bitterness is. Sadness will affect my body, will slow me down, will not let my soul connect to God. Bitterness will affect my garments, my thought, speech, and action, but will actually motivate my essence, myself, to connect to God. Ali, did you understand that? Yes. First, Linda.
So is this the concept of descent for the purpose of ascent? Is that, or is this a different?
The Rebbe is going to talk about, you are right on target, Linda. The descent, the bitterness is the step back that lets you jump very far. Correct. There is a story of the Rebbe. Somebody came to the Rebbe who lost a child, and they were very, very bitter. And they said to the Rebbe, it's their last hope. The Rebbe should help them. And the Rebbe turned to the person, I just read it a while back, so I'm not sure the details, but the Rebbe said to the person, can you stand near my table? Stand close to my table? And he stood near, and the Rebbe says to him, can you jump over onto the table? And he says, Rebbe, it's impossible. I have to take a few steps back. And from far, from 2 feet away, I can run and then jump over. And the Rebbe said to him, that's exactly the way God created the universe. And the same applies to our personalities. In order for us to reach farther, higher, sometimes we have to take a step back. Now, I'm not saying that it's acceptable. I'm not saying that tragedies or the loss of some close one is justified, totally unacceptable. That's totally not true. All I'm saying is after the fact, when things happen, because it's God's will, we need to realize that this is for the purpose of allowing us to jump a little farther, a little higher. Okay, Linda, does that answer? Harry?
The sadness.
The opposite. I see. I'm sorry.
Sadness to bitterness?
Yes. Turning sadness into bitterness. That's the idea.
Hope with sadness, but bitterness is just too far gone.
Yeah.
When you're bitter, you're much more in a worse position than you are when you're sad. Bitter is where you want to take revenge or want
Right,
to.
that's the definition. Correct. Yeah, I understand what Harry's saying. The definition of bitterness is what Harry and Linda are saying.
Which is?
Which is the worst case of sadness. I mean, you can cope with sadness a lot easier than when you're bitter. Nothing will move you. You want to lash out, you want to have revenge, you want to just close in on yourself. I mean, that's how I see it.
Okay, just a minute. Let's read it in the text and I'll show you that I define bitterness as a motivate. You are saying, let me make sure I understand you correctly. You tell me that sadness is easy to get out of, but bitterness drives you even farther into melancholy and despair. We in Tanya, and I just saw it, bitterness is what motivates you to do something about it. It does not suck the energy out of you. It just makes you very upset about the state of condition you are. Whereas sadness sucks the energy out of you and makes you not do anything. And that's where God will not be.
So sadness.
Bitterness is a source of motivation. Here is a story for that. There was a chassid by the name of Chatzhe Fagin. Rabbi Cheskel Fagin, he was the secretary of the previous Rebbe. He was a very strong man. They say he said before he died, he was killed by the Nazis. He was a very strong man, mentally and physically. He said that he only cried 3 times in his life, his entire life. I don't know which are the 3 times. But one time he was studying with students in the synagogue when it was totally forbidden. If they catch you studying Torah during the communist ruling, they would put you in jail for 10, 20 years, sometimes in labor camp. So they appointed a guard, a yeshiva boy, to stay outside by the door in case they see a police. they should be able to get the warning in advance to hide the books and run away. While they were doing it, he was having a bringing, and he's talking to them about how far they are from God, how much they should desire to be closer to God, and they started crying, each one for their own sins, each one for their own reasons. Suddenly, the boy, the guard, the boy that was the watchman, motioned to them, there is a policeman that's coming. So immediately they grabbed the books, they hid the books, and each one found a place to hide. One was behind the ark, the other one was on the floor lying down next to under the bench. Another one found a bunch of wood for fire. He was digging himself into the wood. And just 5 minutes go by, and the watchman comes back and says, the policeman was headed to a different direction. He just passed by, it's all clear. And he came out. And the mashpia, Rabbi Fagin, turned to them and he says, tell me, what happened just now? You're scared to get caught, right? So you know that if you're going to get caught, if they're going to catch you, what happens? You will be in jail. What did you do? They said, well, we protected ourselves. We ran away. He says, how come you didn't sad and cry? Why didn't you continue crying for your situation? That's a sign that you previously, all the crying you did before was external, so to say. Because if something bothers you to a point that you worry, it should motivate you to do something. Just like when you worried about the policeman coming in to check and find you, you didn't sit and cry, you acted on. That's the difference between sadness and bitterness. Sadness will make me cry in my condition. Bitterness will make me say, how can I change? What can I do to make sure I don't experience the same thing?
If I look at, there's, to get out of bitterness, there's tangible things that you can do to get out of bitterness, where sadness is more of an emotional drain, but there's tangible things that you can do to get, there's an energy.
It's the lack of energy, sadness.
Sadness,
Right.
lack
You
of
say
energy.
That's to the point.
Yeah.
You are right on the target, except the Alter Rebbe goes a little bit different, a little bit higher than that. So again, and I think I share that, sadness is sucking out your energy. You have no energy, and therefore it will never motivate you to do something about it. You have to get out of your sadness in order for you to function. So when someone is sad, they want to stay in bed. When someone is sad, they don't want to talk to anybody. How do you treat them? You hope that it'll all pass. You try to convince them to stop being sad. But sadness will never motivate you to be active. Bitterness, on the other hand, makes you say to yourself, how can I make sure I don't repeat the same act? How can I make sure I do it better next time? In other words, it's a motivator. It's like taking a step back before you jump farther. It helps you reach much higher. Let's read it in the text. By the way, this is it's fundamental into the Tanya, the Hasidic teaching, and it is becoming part of all the Hasidic movements, all of them. They speak about sadness is the distancing yourself from God, while bitterness eventually will get you closer to God. So again, the rabbi is going to address sadness after you break your body into pieces and you humble yourself below everybody. How is it possible for you to function? And the rabbi is going to address, and he's going to say there are two things. One, that sadness, there is some benefit. It's klipat nuga, the shell of nuga, and temporarily sometimes and I did not explain the reason. The rabbi is bringing from Zohar. These are concepts that the rabbi is going to talk about very quick. But now that you have the introduction, you'll find it in the text. There is a saying in Zohar that sometimes the fixing of the problem is from the problem itself. And let me use example. Today, it's fascinating. The Alter Rebbe in the Zohar did not know that how do you take care of poison, snake poison? How do you you inject venom to the body, right? How do you take all of the aspirin, all the bacterial ailment? they inject the same ailment to the body, allowing the body to fight a milder type of this bacteria, and then the body will be able to know how to fight it, right, doctor? This is something penicillin, right? Penicillin is bacteria. Penicillin is, I think, is the father of all virus treatments. But before penicillin, there wasn't anything similar. He discovered that they were able, by having the bacteria cultured, the bacteria will fight the other bacteria, and that's how penicillin started. The Rebbe says that in order for you to chop wood, how do you chop wood? You have an axe. An axe must have a handle. Where the handle comes from? From the tree. So in order for you to kill a tree, you need to have a tree used to kill the tree, to chop the tree. Says the Rebbe, you take something that's very wrong, that's opposite of God, but it's not forbidden, it's klipat nuga, sadness, and with that, you are able to break the body. So temporarily it's acceptable, as long as it doesn't lead to depression. The second point the Rabbi is going to make is there is a difference between sadness and bitterness. Let's read it in the text. Chapter 31, page 415. In chapter 29, the Alter Rebbe began to deal with the problem of timtum halev, insensitivity of the heart. He quoted the statement of the Zohar that a body impervious to the light of the soul needs to be crushed. By crushing one's spirit, one crushes the sitra achra, the other side of the animal soul, whose arrogance is the cause of timtum halev. The arrogance of the animal soul causes the person not to connect to God, and therefore crushing my body will crush the animal soul. In chapter 29 and 30, the Alter Rebbe described various means of arriving at a feeling of contrition, literally brokenheartedness. That is, reflecting on one's spiritual failing is not waging an adequately strenuous battle against the evil impulse, and realizing that one's failure in this area places him on a level lower than that of the lowliest of his fellow Jew, as explained at length in chapter 30. Remember that? We spoke about that? Now, but while these methods may effectively dispel timtum halev, the insensitivity to God, they would seem to have an undesirable side effect, depression. Chapter 31 deals with this problem. And as I said today, depression is very, very prevalent. Says Rabbi, even if dwelling long and deeply on the above mentioned matters for an hour or two, to be lowly of spirit and contrite of heart leads one to profound depression, let him not be perturbed. Why? True, says the Rebbe, atzvut, depression, derives from the realm of klipat nuga, not of holiness. In other words, if it's not joy, it has nothing to do with godliness. For concerning the realm of holiness, it is written, strength and gladness are in his place. And likewise, the divine presence abides only in man's joy, and the same joy is required for the study of the halacha. Says the Rebbe, there is no exceptions. If you want to be connected to God, you must be happy. Joy is in all over the Bible. Joy is the prerequisite. It's the ground for a relationship with God. When someone is depressed, when someone is sad, God is not around. So how is it possible to crush my ego? While doing so, I am also crushing my emotions and my feeling, and that will cause to bring depression. Any depression then comes from the realm of klipat nuga, except that if the depression is due to spiritual matters arising from one's realization of his spiritual failings, it stems from the good contained in klipat nuga. For, as mentioned in chapter 1, Klipat Nuga contains both good and evil. The evil in Nuga is the source of the ordinary depression, and the positive element in Nuga gives rise to spiritually motivated depression. Yet, even the element of good contained in Nuga is, after all, Klipa, and that's why, for this reason, the Arizal writes that even worry over one's sins is appropriate only during confession, when we do confession at a given time at night, but not during prayer and Torah study. These must be conducted with a joy deriving exclusively from the realm of holiness, as opposed to frivolity and the like. Says the Rebbe, how is it possible to be depressed? Depression, after all, is far from God. It's not forbidden, but it's not from holiness. And therefore, perhaps a person should not have any depression at all. That's right, right. But the Arizal says that there are times of sadness. And as I said to you, joy without sadness does not exist. And there are times we must be sad, like Tisha B'Av, like sitting Shiva. When someone mourns the loss of a close one of 7 relatives, they must sit Shiva and be sad. There are times when you have to be sad. Losing a relationship with somebody is sad. When someone gets divorced, the altar shed tears, and we're supposed to be sad. When a holy man dies, we're supposed to cry and be sad. In other words, sadness, that's the point. This is another important point. And that is, sadness is not forbidden. Otherwise, it would be from the forbidden shell. But sadness is also not holy. It's not from God. It's from the shell. There is some good, there is some bad, but you need to find the good and sift it through to remove all the bad. So the Rebbe is asking, you cannot be sad if you want to be connected to God. How is it possible? The Torah tells us there are times to be sad. The Arizal said we must be sad sometimes when doing confession. When do you say confession? At the Shema and bedtime. That's when you can be sad about your conduct of misconduct or during the day. As the Rebbe will explain later, it's about bitterness. But right now, the question is, why sadness? Where is sadness coming into a Jew who serves God? Why then should one strive to crush the spirit of Sitra Achra with methods that lead to depression, which itself stem from the Sitra Achra of Noga? Says Rebbe, I don't understand. You want to make the person crushing himself and his ego through sadness by making you feel very, very sad. But sadness is not holy. Says the Rebbe, yet this is precisely the method of humbling the Sitra Achra through something of its own species and kind. That is, the Sitra Achra is most effectively attacked by utilizing the good contained within it as a weapon against itself. As our sages expressed it, from the forest itself comes the handle for the axe, which fells the forest. And in similar vein, the encountered one of his own kind, and that's why of this sadness resulted from contemplation of one's spiritual state. It is written, in every sadness there will be profit, some benefit. The profit lies in the joy which follows the sadness, as will be explained later. That is, in what way the sadness itself leads to joy. So the Rebbe says that's the first point. Yes, sadness is a tool in my toolbox, albeit only at some given times, not doing Torah study, not doing prayer, because then I have to be happy. But only a time of confession, when I'm removed from daily activities and other service of God. To crush my ego, we need to have sadness. But the purpose of sadness, as the Rabbi is going to say, is for a benefit that comes afterwards, the jump that it helps you. And that's the second point the Rabbi is going to make. In truth, says the Rabbi, however, the state of being contrite of heart and bitter of soul, that is, remorseful over one's remoteness from God and over the fact that one's soul is clothed in the Sitra Achra, can by no means be described in the holy tongue in Hebrew in the term atzvut. Atzvut is sadness. That's not true sadness. The word atzvut, meaning melancholy, stems from the root which means constricted. In this context, It refers to a numbing depression that constricts one's heart, blocking out all feeling, as the Alter Rebbe continues. Says the Rebbe, for atzvut, and I'm using the word sadness, means that one's heart is as dull as a stone, and that there is no vitality, arousal, or feeling in his heart. But bitterness, merry root, and contrition are just the opposite, since the very fact that one is moved to be embittered is itself a sign of life. Do you understand the distinction? Sadness, atzvut, no energy. I cannot think, I cannot talk, I don't want to socialize because I have no energy. I'm unable to cope with life's challenges. That's sadness. And in that state, actually there is no godliness. You cannot pray, you cannot study, you cannot do anything good. There is no place for that. Bitterness is the pain over my distance from God. So it is motivating my energy. It energizes the person to do better, to change, to act a little different. And that's why it's called, that's why we use the word bitterness. Except that this vitality derives from the holy attributes of severity, gvurot, and is therefore expressed itself in bitterness, whereas joy derives from the holy attributes of kindness, chasadim, for the heart contains both the attributes kindness and severity. What the rabbi is saying before we continue is that you can, it's already 8 o'clock. The rabbi is saying you can serve God in both ways. One is through kindness. Kindness is the expression of greatness and happiness and joy and sharing. Then you can serve God out of gvurot. Gvura is restrictions, it's boundaries, and that's what bitterness is. I measure and I question and I look at every step of my behavior, and if I see that I'm not as I should be, it causes me to say, how is it possible? Why? I have so much talent. I have so much blessings, and yet I'm wasting it. And that caused the person to be sad in the terms of merry root, which is bitterness that motivates the person to act much better, to try harder, to do better. And that is something that is acceptable. That is the way that God wants. So we have discovered sadness is totally unacceptable because it takes out every energy. It's very close to a dead person. We also discovered that there are 2 types of sadness. There is one that's plain sadness, depression, and that's not acceptable. But bitterness is acceptable. We also discovered that sadness comes from klipat nuga. It's not godly, but it comes from a shell, that there is some good that if you can pull it out, sift it out, you will be able to benefit. And at given times, we are allowed to have sadness because from the evil itself, you find the medicine against to fight the evil. And then the rabbi is speaking about the idea that sadness should lead into bitterness, which motivates us to work harder. The rabbi is going to continue in on the same concept further and teaching us about hope and despair. The difference between the two is what sadness versus bitterness is. We'll conclude right here and hopefully continue next week. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.